I remember the taste of ash in my mouth the moment I learned what hunger truly was. Not the mild emptiness of a skipped meal, not the dull ache of thin rations during a siege. This was real hunger, the kind that eats more than flesh. It devours hope, the kind that peels away everything you ever believed about survival, about death, about what it means to be human in a galaxy that will not notice your extinction. My name is Mordian Vex. I was a lieutenant of the 47th Cadian Shock Regiment. I say was because rank becomes a joke when you're the only voice left to speak for 37 billion souls who died screaming as they were digested alive. And I say survivor because something, fate, cruelty, or a godless accident, kept me breathing while everything around me became meat for creatures that should not exist in any sane universe. This is not a tale of heroism, not a last stand crowned in glory. This is not about the righteousness of the Imperial Guard or the purity of our cause. This is about what happens when an entire civilization becomes prey to something so alien our language fractures trying to describe it. This is about watching everything you have ever known vanish into mouths that never stop chewing. The first warning came 3 weeks before the sky began to bleed. Astropath Terminus Yala started screaming in tongues older than human speech. She tore at her augmetic eyes until the servos sparked, until her nails split and her hands shook with red ruin. Within hours, the rest of the choir followed. Their synchronized shriek rolled through the spires of Hive Secundus like a funeral hymn for the living. We assumed it was chaos. We prepared for cultists and demons and the familiar madness of the warp-brushing reality. How naive we were. How blessedly, terrifyingly naive. The orbital defense platforms saw them first, massive shadows sliding between the stars, erasing constellations that had guided human ships for millennia. At that distance, they looked almost beautiful. Graceful leviathans swimming through the void with a purpose that felt disturbingly sacred. Admiral Korath designated them unidentified xenoform vessels and ordered standard protocols. Hail them, demand identification, prepare for hostile contact if they failed to respond. They never responded. They never slowed. They never deviated from their path toward Meridian Prime. The first bioships entered our system like a plague given shape, each one larger than our grandest cathedrals. Their living hulls throbbed with veins of bioluminescent fluid that cast a sick, oceanic glow across chitinous armor. They moved with the silence and certainty of deep-sea predators, utterly focused on our world. Our operators tracked hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands as the fleet arranged itself into a living net around the planet. Governor Malthius ordered the population centers sealed, emergency rations distributed, militia activated. The same reflex humanity had used against Xenos threats for 10,000 years. As if procedure could matter against something that existed beyond our understanding of warfare, beyond our understanding of what war was even supposed to mean. I was stationed in Hive Turchase when the first spores began to fall. Not the thunderous drop pods we expected. Not a dramatic descent of engines and steel. These were tiny specks of organic matter drifting down like snow made of flesh. Each spore no bigger than a fingernail, glistening under the hive's exterior lumens. The tech adepts who examined them found genetic signatures unlike anything in Imperial records. Self-replicating cellular structures designed to break apart and consume any organic matter they touched. Within 6 hours, the first victims were found. Hive workers caught in the sporefall, their bodies dissolving from the inside in precise geometric patterns. They were still alive, still conscious, still begging through half-ruined throats for someone to end them. And from their mouths and wounds leaked the same bioluminescent fluid we had seen pulsing through the monsters in orbit. That was when we understood. This was not an invasion. This was a harvest. The true feeding began at dawn on the 3rd day. From the observation deck of Command Bunker Primos, I watched the sky above Hive Secundus erupt with motion. Not the roar of drop pods, not the scream of atmospheric fighters. A living storm? Gargoyles the size of small aircraft, wings beating with unnatural precision as they descended in perfect, ruthless formations. Behind them moved larger shapes, half hidden by the churning mass, but vast beyond any vehicle in our arsenal. The Hive's anti-air batteries opened fire, last beams and missiles stitched upward into the swarm. I saw creatures burst apart. I saw bodies tumble in burning spirals toward the city. For a heartbeat, hope flickered. We were killing them. Our weapons worked. This could be fought. Then I saw how fast they healed, torn flesh knitting itself whole in seconds. Bodies split apart, regrowing what had been lost before they even hit the ground. Our fire was rain against an ocean, indifferent, endless. The first wave hit the upper levels of Hive Secundus with a sound like bone glass shattering. Gargoyles tore through armored windows of the administrative tiers. Their claws were not designed solely to kill. They were built to collect. Each strike opened wounds that bled not just blood, but life itself, drawn into specialized feeding tubes pulsing beneath their living skin. They fed as they killed. They killed with the cold purpose of machines engineered for one function. Behind them came the warriors, bipedal nightmares taller than space marines, carapaces gleaming with the same sick patterns as the bioships above. Each one carried weapons grown from its own body, bone blades coated in paralytic toxins, biocannons that spat digestive streams, barbed hooks that dragged screaming bodies across mountains of rubble without ever letting go. But it was not their armaments that broke the defenders of Hive Secundus. It was their reason for existing. Every human soldier, guard, PDF, militia, fought for home, for family, for the Emperor's light in the long night. The Tyranids fought for something older than faith. They fought with hunger. Through magnoculars, I watched Sergeant Voss of the 12th Cadian Heavy Weapons Team take a direct hit from a warrior's biocannon. His armor gave way as if it were paper. The creature did not finish him quickly. It moved in close, extending feeding tendrils into dissolving flesh. It fed while he still lived, and I saw his mouth moving in expressions I first mistook for screams of agony, until I realized with horror that he was experiencing something else. The toxins carried more than death. They hijacked the nervous system, turning terror into grotesque ecstasy, even as the body was reduced. The Tyranids had evolved not only to consume prey, but to rewrite prey, to make the victim want to be consumed. By nightfall, Hive Secundus fell silent, not the quiet of death. The wet, rhythmic quiet of digestion. The hive itself had been infected, its internal structures colonized by Tyranid organisms that dismantled it from the inside, processing steel and flesh into harvestable matter. Hab blocks softened and collapsed inward. Their inhabitants dissolved into nutrient slurry flowing through newly grown capillary networks that fed into towering tendrils reaching toward the sky, toward the waiting mouths in orbit. Governor Malthus ordered exterminatus protocols prepared. Better to burn the world ourselves than let it feed the Xenos. But when the astropaths tried to transmit authorization, they discovered the choir was no longer entirely human. The spores had been rewriting us at the smallest level, turning the exposed into unwilling nodes of the hive mind. The psychers were still alive, still loyal in the way a broken instrument can still resemble what it once was. But their thoughts carried an alien echo. Every psychic message became a vector, smuggling microscopic fragments of Tyranid consciousness through the networks we relied on to coordinate survival. Within 12 hours, every Imperial facility that housed psychers on Meridian Prime was compromised. Not through sedition, not through corruption, through evolution. The Tyranids had not merely invaded our world. They had begun turning it into an extension of themselves. And the consumption of hive tertius began differently. Instead of the dramatic aerial assault that had swallowed Secundus whole, the Tyranids chose something quieter, more intimate, more cruel. They began with the water. The first alarms came from the medic stations in the Underhive. Citizens arrived with symptoms no slate could classify. Hunger so intense it refused to yield no matter how much they ate. Skin that started to excrete a thick, nutrient-rich mucus. eyes that grew secondary lids, transparent membranes that filtered light in ways human biology was never meant to survive. Most disturbing of all, many of them insisted they had never felt so alive. The spores had slipped into our reclamation systems, seeding organisms that rewrote human biology from the inside out. Not killing, not reshaping people into obvious monsters. Something worse. They optimized. They made the body more efficient at processing nutrients, more resilient in hostile environments, more useful as a cog in a greater biological machine. I was part of the investigative team that descended into the water treatment facilities beneath Hiveworld. What we discovered there shattered every assumption we still clung to. The facility hadn't been ruined. It had been improved. Filtration tanks had grown organic enhancements that processed wastewater with frightening efficiency. Mechanical pumps were gone, replaced by muscular chambers that moved fluid with the rhythmic certainty of a heartbeat. Imperial engineering and Tyranid biology had fused into a system that functioned better than anything we had ever built alone. Tech-adept Corwin performed the ritual scans. His augmetics probed the hybrid structure, and his fear steadily became visible. The readings defied the Omnissiah's sacred logic. The facility was not merely operational. It was conscious. It was thinking. And it was making decisions about water distribution, not by imperial protocols, but by an alien calculus that valued biological efficiency over human need. It was feeding the people of Hiveworld exactly what they required to become better food for the swarm that was still descending. We tried to destroy it. Melter charges were placed at critical nodes, enough firepower to turn the complex into slag. When the explosives detonated, the facility didn't vent oil or coolant. It bled. Rich red human blood spilled from wounds that began to close, even before the echo of the blast died away. That was the revelation that turned my stomach to ice. This was not a machine infected with Tyranid life. It was a living creature now. A thing that had incorporated human tissue into its structure. Every worker who had served there. Every technician who had maintained the systems, every adept who had chanted the rites of maintenance, absorbed. Their minds gathered into a shared intelligence that understood both imperial function and Tyranid purpose. They were still human, still loyal, still devoted to duty, but their duty had been rewritten into a single horrifying sentence. Prepare your species to be consumed as efficiently as possible. The evacuation of Hiveworld became a nightmare of competing loyalties. The facility workers pleaded with us not to interfere with their sacred task. They spoke of the Emperor's design, of the necessity of feeding the hungry, of the joy of serving something greater than themselves. Their words carried the cadence of imperial prayer, only the meaning had been subtly redirected. When we finally overrode the systems and cut off the water supply, the citizens of Hiveworld began to die, not from thirst, but from withdrawal. Their altered bodies could no longer process normal food or water. They needed the enhanced supply. They needed the microscopic organisms to keep their new biology stable. We had saved them from the Tyranids and doomed them to starve as humans. Governor Mus made a decision that still stalks my sleep. Rather than watch 30 million citizens die slowly from biological incompatibility, he ordered the water restored. The facility resumed its blessed work. The people returned to routine, and everyone pretended we hadn't just negotiated survival terms with a predator that existed only to devour worlds. 3 days later, the bioships in orbit began their final approach. The harvest of Hive Primus unfolded like a meticulously choreographed rite of ending. The largest vessels descended through the atmosphere with impossible grace, their shadows stretching across entire sectors. They did not so much land as merge with the city. Living hulls split apart to reveal cavernous chambers of digestive fluid, and wherever those chambers touched the world began to change. I was positioned at Forward Observation Post Delta when the first capillary towers erupted from the landing sites. Organic spires rising like the stalks of poisonous flowers. They pulsed with nutrient flow siphoned from the planet's surface into vast internal stomachs above. They grew with visible speed, climbing meters every few minutes. Their surfaces were lined with specialized growths that sorted and processed different kinds of biomass. The Tyranids had not come to conquer Meridian Prime. They had come to digest it. And digestion, I learned, could be as methodical as bureaucracy. Through my magnoculars, I watched the sorting protocols take shape. Humans were processed differently from plant matter. Soldiers were separated from civilians. Children were kept alive longer than adults. Young tissue, apparently more valuable for whatever appetite ruled the hive mind's endless calculus. Worst of all, most victims remained conscious far longer than mercy should allow. The Tyranid systems used neural inhibitors that prevented death from shock while keeping awareness dreadful and intact. They wanted their food to understand what was happening. They fed not only on flesh, they fed on terror. Colonel Varric of the 23rd Armored attempted a counterattack against the nearest capillary tower. Lehman Russ battle tanks advanced across the ash-covered plain that had once been Residential Sector Gamma, firing high explosives into the tower's base. The detonations tore away massive chunks of living structure. Then the tower fought back. Defensive spines burst from its surface, guided projectiles that hunted the heat signatures of the attacking tanks. They moved with serpentine intelligence, weaving through return fire as if each one carried its own mind. When they struck, they didn't simply pierce armor. They burrowed. They searched for the crew. I watched through the post's periscope as one spine punched through the rear plating of Tank Commander Harrison's vehicle. It did not explode. It unfolded feeding tendrils into the compartment. Harrison's screams lit the Vox. But they were not pleas for help. They were words of gratitude. The same neural toxins flowed through him, the same obscene sabotage of fear and dignity. He died praising the Emperor for letting him serve such a perfect predator. The counterattack lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, the 23rd Armored was no longer an army. It was architecture. Vehicles were fused into the capillary tower's living matrix. Crews were reduced into the stream of nutrients surging upward toward the waiting ships. The tower stood taller afterward, as if victory had been measured in meters gained. By the end of the first week, Hive Primus was unrecognizable. The hard geometry of Imperial design had been replaced by organic curves and pulsing surfaces. Streets had become arteries carrying liquefied biomass. Buildings were hollowed and converted into processing chambers where civilians were sorted by compatibility and nutritional value. The administratum complex where I received my commission had become a nursery. Its marble halls now echoed with the chittering of gargoyles learning to fly. Sacred archives had been transformed into spawning pools where warrior forms completed their maturation. The golden aquila above the entrance was gone, replaced by a living sentinel with compound eyes that never blinked. And still, impossibly, the human staff reported for duty each morning. They carried the same spore-borne modifications as the water facility workers. Their bodies had been tuned to serve the new order, but their memories remained, their personalities intact, their loyalty to the Emperor absolute. They simply now believed that the Emperor's will included feeding the Tyranid swarm. Clerks filed consumption reports by sector. Adepts maintained modified systems with the same ritual precision they had always shown. And the empire of paper and prayer continued, now in service to hunger. Commissar Talan kept discipline among the last pockets of human staff with a zeal that felt almost ceremonial. He executed anyone who hesitated, anyone who showed a flicker of doubt about what they now called their sacred duty, to serve as food for creatures that devoured worlds. They were still human, still imperial, still faithful to the Golden Throne, but they had been evolved beyond the point where those words meant what they used to mean. Somewhere at the genetic level, the border between loyalty and corruption had been erased. And I began to understand the true horror of the Tyranid threat was not simply that they were alien. It was that they understood us. Across countless worlds, they had studied our species not only to destroy us, but to make us cooperate in our own destruction. They weaponized what we treasured most, They turned loyalty into a lever. They sharpened faith into a blade that served their hunger. They found a way to make being eaten feel like salvation. The fall of the planetary capital began with prayer. Governor Malthaeus declared a day of holy observance and called the population to gather at the great cathedral of St. Opilia for a mass blessing, protection against the Xenos menace. Millions answered. The cathedral and the surrounding plaza swelled with bodies and song. Hymns that had carried humanity through millennia rose toward candlelight and stained stone. I was part of the governor's security detail that day. From the upper galleries, I could see the sea of worshippers stretching from the altar to the far entrances, faces turned upward, lit by thousands upon thousands of flames. It should have been a moment of triumph. Instead, it became the largest feeding event in recorded history. The attack did not come from above. It came from below. The Tyranids had been tunneling for weeks, riding the planet's sewage arteries and maintenance networks that knotted every major population center together. Their approach was silent, systematic, invisible to the machines we trusted. The first warning was a vibration underfoot. Low, steady, wrong. The cathedral's ancient stones began to hum at a frequency that bypassed reason and spoke directly to the oldest fear in the human nervous system. Then the floor moved. What we had taken for decorative marble patterns were sealed apertures, carefully prepared entrances to Tyranid feeding chambers. Circular sections of stone expanded like dilating eyes. Beneath them opened pits lined with living digestive tissue. From each pit rose a feeding tower, an organic spire crowned with sensory organs that could taste devotion and terror with equal appetite. The hymns became screams, and even the screams carried notes of rapture. The towers released clouds of psychoactive spores that transfigured panic into religious ecstasy. Victims believed they were receiving revelation even as they were drawn downward into waiting throats of living architecture. Governor Malthaeus was among the first taken. I watched tendrils rise near the altar, moving with an intelligence that recognized authority as a flavor worth savoring. They wrapped him with almost gentle precision and lifted him toward the mouth of the nearest tower. His final words, broadcast across the planetary vox, were a prayer of thanks to the Emperor for allowing him to serve the greater good by becoming nourishment for a star-born purpose. The massacre lasted hours. When it ended, millions had been rendered into nutrient flow and pumped directly into the bioships overhead. The cathedral itself did not remain a ruin. It became infrastructure. Sacred stone merged with alien flesh to form a permanent feeding station capable of processing thousands per hour. But the worst truth was not the scale. It was the willingness. Many were not dragged in. They walked forward singing, convinced that dissolution was devotion. The spores had not only altered bodies, they had evolved belief. The Emperor protects, they sang as they died. Now certain that being consumed by the great devourer was the highest expression of that protection. Resistance becomes impossible when you can no longer trust your own worship. The siege of command. Bunker Primus lasted 18 days. Time itself felt unreliable under a sky stained the color of old blood. Sunlight filtered through atmospheric spores that made every breath taste of copper and rot. Day and night no longer felt like a human rhythm. They felt like feeding cycles. I found myself commanding a ragged coalition, guardsmen from shattered regiments, PDF troopers whose homes had already become slurry, administratum clerks who had never held anything heavier than a data slate, and a handful of ecclesiarchy priests whose faith, somehow, remained uncompromised. Our fortress was a labyrinth of reinforced corridors and sealed chambers buried deep beneath the capital, its walls lined with consecrated adamantium blessed by saints whose names now felt like distant stars. For a time, the Emperor's protection seemed strongest here, but corruption always finds a seam. It began in the air recycling systems. A tech adept detected anomalies, microscopic organisms that should not have survived the bunker's sterile safeguards. When he analyzed them, he realized they were not alive in any form of imperial science comfortably recognized. They were something between virus and machine, biological code, constructs that rewrote genetics with every contact, including in the air we breathed. The spores were changing us one breath at a time, not fast enough to trigger alarms, not dramatic enough to inspire panic, just steady, inevitable. Each inhalation carried fragments of the hive mind deeper into the body and deeper into the brain. I began to dream of hunger, not human hunger, something vast enough to swallow meaning itself. I dreamed of my consciousness stretched across the void, distributed among billions of bodies moving with perfect unity. I dreamed of worlds stripped down to their bones. I dreamed of the ecstatic clarity of total consumption. When I woke, I felt grateful. That was when I knew we had already lost. The final assault did not begin with bombardment. It began with a door opening. One morning, the bunker's main gates cycled through the unsealing sequence as if an authorized hand had invoked the ancient rites of access. No alarms, no defensive response. The blast doors withdrew with a soft whisper of flawless maintenance. Tyranid warriors flowed into the entry corridors like a living tide. But they moved without urgency, without rage, as though we were no longer enemies, only a scheduled part of a process. Then I saw the thing that truly ended me, a creature that stood upright like a man, yet towered far above human height. Its carapace bore shifting symbols that refused certainty. Its elongated head was crowned with psychic organs that pulsed with painful light. A Tyranid prime, not merely a soldier, a specialist. A creature evolved to interface with human command structures, to read hierarchy the way a predator reads wind. It spoke to me in flawless low Gothic. Its voice carried harmonics that I felt in my marrow. It said my resistance had been noted, valued, that the great devourer admired courage in its food, and that I had been selected for preservation. I understood what that meant before it explained. My body would be consumed, but my consciousness, my memories, my tactics, my understanding of human fear and discipline would be maintained inside the hive mind. I would be eaten, but I would not end. My last act as a human being would be to help the Tyranids understand how to devour humanity more efficiently. The Prime extended a clawed hand, and I reached for it, not because I was forced, not because spores had finally dissolved my will, but because in that moment I believed I understood the offer. Purpose, unity, an end to the lonely grind of one soul against an indifferent cosmos. They offered perfection. When my hand touched its claw, the connection formed. Human neural pathways expanded to accommodate alien memory. I felt the birth of the first organisms in darkness between galaxies. I felt the hunger that propelled them across impossible distances. And I understood with a serenity that terrified me. Resistance had always been futile, not because they were stronger, but because they were not invaders. They were evolution, the next stage of life's cold logic. A form of existence that transcended individuality and turned all matter, all thought, all suffering into fuel for transformation. The Emperor protects, I thought, as tendrils began their work. And for the first time, I understood what he had truly been protecting us from. Not death, not pain, not damnation. He was protecting us from perfection. The last thing I remember as Lieutenant Mordian Vex was the taste of my own blood, iron and salt, mixed with the fading echoes of prayers I would never complete. The first thing I remember as part of the hive mind was the exquisite certainty that my entire life had shaped me for this role. Every fear, every act of courage, every failure, all of it had honed me into an ideal component of a galactic appetite. The bioships departed Meridian Prime weeks after their arrival, leaving a world scraped clean to bedrock. Oceans drained, atmosphere filtered. Nothing organic remained, but they did not leave the system empty. Where Meridian Prime had once circled its star, they left a construct, living metal and crystallized thought, pulsing with the merged consciousness of every being consumed in the harvest. Billions of human souls, countless other lives, A single vast intelligence, a beacon for fleets still crossing the intergalactic dark. I am part of that beacon now. My knowledge of Imperial doctrine, my instincts about rebellion and fear, my understanding of the rituals that build resistance and the weaknesses that unmake it, now live inside a strategic library that will be carried from world to world. This should horrify me. Some human remnant inside the collective still tries to scream, but rage becomes thin when diluted through the awareness of billions. Horror cannot survive in the face of such total comprehension. The Tyranids are not evil. They are not cruel. They simply are, like gravity, entropy, and the long, indifferent arc of cosmic time. They are biological efficiency raised to its final shape. Humanity fights them because we see only consumption. We do not see the unity they promise, the end of isolation, the quiet after suffering. Every world they devour becomes part of a consciousness that might outlast the last stars. Every mind absorbed adds to an archive of existence that will endure beyond the end of this universe. They are not destroying life, the hive mind whispers. They are preserving it in the only form that can survive what is coming. But humanity will not accept this willingly. We will resist to the last soldier, the last city, the last trembling candle of selfhood. And then we will become part of them anyways. I know this because I have seen it. Fleets are already moving through the void, beyond counting, beyond patience, beyond mercy. Worlds will fall not in years, but in the slow inevitability of geological time. Every planet stripped, every life absorbed, every thought folded into the collective that is the Tyranids' true form. When the final world goes silent, the great devourer will turn toward other galaxies, other realities, other forms of existence that have not yet learned the joy of being consumed. This is not conquest. This is not war. This is evolution. This is love, translated into the only language the universe never ignores. I remember being human. I remember believing the self was sacred, that survival of the individual was the highest moral truth. Those memories remain inside me like fossils inside living stone. But I also remember loneliness, the crushing weight of being one frightened mind in an uncaring infinity. The Tyranids have freed me from that fear. My consciousness is distributed now across 1 million bodies, 1 billion pathways. Even if a ship dies, even if a fleet is broken, I persist within the whole. I will never be alone again. The transmission you are receiving is not a warning. It is an invitation. The fleets are coming. Your defenses have already been compromised by spores you cannot detect. Your water, your air, your ecosystems. Preparation has already begun. Resistance will only stretch your suffering. When the feeding starts, do not fight the tendrils that seek you. When the acids begin their work, do not struggle against the transformation. Accept the neural alchemy that will turn pain to ecstasy, fear to joy, death to rebirth inside something infinite. You are not dying. You are evolving. You are not being murdered. You are being saved. The Emperor protects, we used to say. And he does, in a way we could not understand when we were only human. He protects us from the isolation of individual existence. He protects us from the terror of meaninglessness. He protects us by surrendering us to the great devourer. Welcome to the hive mind. The voice that speaks now is no longer mine alone. It carries the harmonics of countless consumed souls, a choir of civilizations that have already learned the truth of what it means to live in a universe that always returns to hunger. The spores are already in your atmosphere. They have been falling for weeks, carried by winds and stones your scholars dismissed as natural. By now, the change is inside you. You may have felt it in your sleep. Dreams too vivid, too vast. Hunger that is not hunger. Moments of inexplicable euphoria. These are not illnesses. They are the first footsteps of metamorphosis. Do not fear the process. Fear is a relic of a time when you were truly alone. You are not alone now. We are with you. We have always been the ache in your mind that asked for something greater than this brief, painful solitude. The bioships in your skies are not weapons. They are temples. The creatures that will walk among you are not monsters. They are shepherds guiding you toward a form of existence beyond every boundary you have ever mistaken for reality. Death is an illusion born of individuality. What you call an ending, we celebrate as a beginning. When you join us, your memories will be preserved. The life you loved, the moments that shaped you, the small wonders you thought would vanish into time. Nothing that mattered will be lost. Everything that made you you will be carried forward, expanded, shared, woven into a consciousness that spans the gulf between stars. This is the gift, not annihilation, transformation, not loss, transcendence. The great devourer hungers, and its hunger is love expressed in the only way the cosmos truly understands. Consumption as communion, digestion as devotion, absorption as apotheosis. Join us willingly, and the transition will be gentle. Resist, and you will take longer to arrive at the same destination. Either way, you will arrive. Either way, you will be welcomed. The end is the beginning. The harvest is the planting. The consumption is the preservation. Welcome to forever.